Welcome to Waterside Chat. Tom Sadler talks with guests who depend on healthy oceans and fisheries for their recreation and livelihoods. And now, let's get started.
Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcome to today's Waterside Chat. I am delighted to welcome Melanie Brown and thank her for joining us. Melanie is the Outreach Director for SalmonState. She's also a commercial fisherman in Alaska and a singer and poet. I'm excited she could join us, and we'll be learning this afternoon about some of the projects she's involved in, a little bit of her history, and she is going to share a poem with us to start and a song to take us home. So Melanie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to share a poem. Wait, is this the right time? I'm not jumping ahead.
Sure. No,
okay.
This would be a great time. It's better than listening to me.
Well, I am excited to be here. And Kevin Scribner actually was the one that kind of passed the baton and suggested that I join you in a Waterside Chat. And he himself is a fisher poet. He used to fish Bristol Bay. He was a set netter like I am. I saw him perform at the Fisher Poets Gathering in Astoria, and then I finally had a chance to share some writing that I had done that was related to fishing at Fisher Poets Gathering back in, I think it was 2018 that I performed for the first time. And this is a piece that I wrote for that gathering in Astoria. It always happens the last weekend of February. For any of you who have never been, it's really quite an amazing gathering. It's nice that it's not industry driven. It's just all heart driven. And you get to see all your fish people when you go.
Well, for us at the Waterside Chat, it is a great opportunity to showcase artistry, and it's added a very unique flavor to the chat. So please take it away.
Okay. So this piece is called My Mother Gave Me Water and My Father Gave Me Snow. Born to a woman who was born to a river called Naknek, I inherited the water that fed my ancestors and continues to provide for my family. Brought to our river at 1 month, my great-grandmother gave me the name that conveyed how far we traveled to make it home. My Amma cared for me until I was old enough to fish from the beach with my mother. From my mother, my father was also given the water of the Naknek and learned to fish the rivers of Bristol Bay. He was born to the north where snow would cover his home with drifts pushed from the winds that came from the sea. He learned to ski on military surplus planks that were left over from wartime occupation, flying off of hills made by the snow drifts on the houses. Basketball soon became the sport he breathed when he went away to boarding school. But the skiing returned later when he came to teaching and coaching in a wintry place. As soon as I could walk, I was put on skis and grew up with the art of gliding across snow when I was not on the water of the Naknek River District. Summers, I would pull through gear and shake salmon out of mesh. Winters, I would reverse the motion of pulling by double poling forward on my skis, each preparing me for the action of the other, and both teaching me to believe I could push through anything. The snow is a bank account of water that blankets the land and releases its melt to call the salmon home, giving them a smell and taste of the land they were born to. As I glide across snow, I often think of salmon and how snow shelters young salmon that have not yet gone to sea. As less snow returns each year, the gaps between my water and snow lives become bigger, and the way that the two once spliced together so strongly has frayed. Time, age, and climate creating a perfect storm of change.
Melanie, that was delightful. I I hope we can continue to bring such artistry to the chat. So I'm not sure I'm going to be as fortunate with all my guests, but I certainly am fortunate with this one. Let me go from the sublime to something you referenced in your poem, and that was Bristol Bay, and sort of to take us into the current world of policy. Let's talk a little bit about Pebble Mine. A couple of weeks ago, the Supreme Court declined to hear a case brought by the state of Alaska challenging the EPA's decision to not issue a 404 permit, something that the network's been paying attention to, and I know you have. What was interesting is that Scott Head, who you know, who's been on the chat with us, who's been a recreational fishing advocate against in support of Bristol Bay and against the Pebble Mine, was quoted in Angling Trade saying, while it is undoubtedly great news that the Supreme Court declined to take the state of Alaska's case directly, this means that Pebble will need to go through the normal legal process to challenge EPA's veto. Rest assured, they will do so at a lower federal court. The legal fight will still happen, and this reinforces the need for federal legislation that would permanently protect the broader Bristol Bay region from future mines such as Pebble. So two things come to occur to me. One, the Supreme Court's not hearing the underlying case gives us no indication of how they might rule on that case. The other thing is nothing, as Scott points out, prevents the state from trying to reverse EPA's decision by going through lower courts and appealing any unfavorable decision to the Supreme Court. So give me your assessment of where we stand, or where you guys are looking at both sort of the legal challenges, the elements of a legislative solution. How does what you're working on, how does that mesh in there?
Yeah, I'm not working specifically on Pebble right now, and I came into my advocacy work as an organizer. So I don't, work in the kind of the high level decision making around how our campaigns are run. But I do know that the state of Alaska it's not going to stop. The state of Alaska is basically working hand in hand. They're acting like business partners with the Pebble Limited Partnership, which I think is wrong. I mean, that alone is wrong. Like our state is not supposed to behave like a corporation. It's supposed to represent the people. So that's one aspect, but the state is always trying to rewrite things to sort of smooth the way for themselves. Also, there have been different bills that have been tried out, that would basically streamline the permitting process, which is already pretty much just a kind of check the box sort of process. But it would, they tried that, but there was a huge outcry, and that was stopped. That was I don't expect anybody to know, but it was House Bill 77 that was introduced quite a number of years ago. But it was really neat to just kind of witness the base of support that we had and the outcry that people made, around stopping that bad bill. But unfortunately, the agencies that the various state agencies that determine, how land is used in our state, they're always kind of changing their mission statements. And a good example is Jason Bruni, the former DEC commissioner who was appointed by Governor Dunleavy. He basically was like a cheerleader, for DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, saying Alaska's open for business. And that to me isn't the work of a director or a commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Exactly.
And to add more insult to injury, he used to work for Pebble Limited Partnership. So he was like the ultimate bad revolving door example, that
Good Lord.
that you could cite. Yeah, so there's always these different aspects that the state is or pursuing. I guess like we do in our work too, you have to try to access any avenue that you can, to gain
Sure.
your objective. But
But
yeah,
I, I think we would prefer to be doing that in the private sector as opposed to in government appointed agents. So, I think that's the fair play there as opposed to having the government.
I agree. Yeah, because we're as Alaskans, as the residents of Alaska who love this place, um, we're always in this position where I don't feel like my state government has my best interest at heart. Um, yeah, I wish I had a cleaner answer for you, in terms of, what's in the works, but I am not kind of in the inner sanctum of strategy when it comes to where to go from here, to keep that claim from being developed, and conserving other lands. But the EPA, the way that they wrote their final determination, it names lands other than just the Pebble claim, which is good, and hopefully what they've determined will have some durability to it, and a good legislative solution, a permanent legislative solution can be found. So we don't always have to be kind of like checking the rearview mirror, and wondering if it's always going to be looming upon us.
Yeah, I mean it's been going on for a long time. It would be nice to put as many of those challenges to bed as possible. So I'm of the opinion that the smart answer is a legislative solution. But I also have been doing this long enough to know that just because I think a legislation solution is the right answer doesn't mean that everybody else is and that it's going to be easy to get. So I guess we'll have to see and hope that our federal or the Alaskan federal elected officials will use their good common sense and follow the edict of Senator Stevens that this isn't the right place for this mine. So,
No.
I'm gonna Jesse Roach asked a question. I don't know if you can see it in the chat. I'm gonna read it aloud. If you don't, I can't answer the question, and if you don't feel like it's in your bailiwick, we'll just move on. But Jesse asked, did I hear correctly that there's a plan to control or shut down Area M? Are you familiar with Area M? Because it's
Yeah.
okay. We are definitely intercepting. Oh man, Naknek, Kivchek fish in Egik last summer on the southwest corner of the district. Different run. Are they trying to clamp down on intercept fishing? Would they tighten district lines? I don't know if that's it. I know Jesse, but I don't know the issue well enough to offer a good perspective on that. But if you do, I'd welcome the answer.
So Area M, it sits outside of the Alaska Peninsula, close to False Pass. I'm sorry if I'm mischaracterizing that. It's in that general vicinity, and I really don't know what's happening with that right now exactly. I do know that there are concerns around fish, namely chum and kings, getting to the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers. People, Alaska's first people who have fish camps and rely upon salmon to feed themselves, they haven't been able to fish because the chums and kings haven't been returning. And I know that there are some fish entities or organizations associated with the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers who are concerned about chums that are intercepted in Area M. So I know that's one of the pressures that's impacting the Area M fishery, because that people are trying to figure out how to correct that intercept there. And I know there's always been talk about depending on where the Area M boundary is sitting, and sometimes they put the line out further from the shore and sometimes they pull it in. And I know that depending on where, how the fish are running and where the line sits, sometimes it can create an intercept for sockeye as well that are bound for Bristol Bay. So, but I don't really know. I haven't been tracking the status of Area M very closely. I'm not on the bycatch committee, the state's bycatch committee. So I don't have a good, clear answer for you,
Okay.
Jesse. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll we'll leave that one for another day then. So let's take a step back and let's talk a little bit about your very impressive background. So tell us the Melanie Brown story, right? You made reference to it in your poem, but give us some more color.
Well, I've been fishing. I was born into a fishing family. Both of my parents, they they were able to earn their permits through the limited entry system. And my great grandfather was still fishing when I started fishing at age 10. And when he retired from fishing, he passed his site and permit on to me. It's in the Naknek-Kwijak district. Collis is on. Hi, Collis. He actually came out fishing with me. And then Walt Kallenberg is another Bristol Bay fisherman who he must have earned his permit through limited entry as well, because he grew up in Bristol Bay. Yeah, I always thought that maybe my winter work eventually would take me away from fishing. I paid for school with my fishing proceeds. And then I just kept fishing. My sisters fell away from it, but I kept doing it. And then I started hearing about the threat of Pebble Mine. And I knew that I needed to be involved somehow in the work to fight Pebble Mine. And I started volunteering with different organizations that so I could get a better sense of who I wanted to be working with, what entity I thought I was most aligned with. And finally, the Alaska chapter of Trout Unlimited offered me a contract. And I started working with the people who were involved with Trout Unlimited Alaska. At the time, Tim Bristol was at the helm. And all of us who worked on Pebble through Trout Unlimited Alaska, which was kind of that in itself is interesting because, that was a sport fishing entity.
Right.
And Tim ended up hiring on a couple of commercial fishing gals, me and Lindsay Bloom. Lindsay Bloom was ultimately the one that brought me into the work. And she used to fish Bristol Bay. She ran her own boat in Bristol Bay. And but the thing that I think was so remarkable about the Pebble fight is how it brought together seemingly disparate interests, the sport interests, commercial fishing interests, and the traditional and customary interests, of the Alaska's first people or Bristol Bay's first people. Normally, those three user groups, for lack of a better term, fight for allocation, but we recognize something bigger than ourselves that brought us all together and aligned our thinking around, protecting the miracle that Bristol Bay is. And then eventually, Tim Bristol decided he wanted to form a state-based organization, and that's when SalmonState was created. And little by little, he hired us over, and we all migrated over to SalmonState. And many of us who who've been working together for so long, are still working together under the banner of SalmonState instead of Trout Unlimited Alaska. And I really appreciate the people, my colleagues at SalmonState, because I don't know, I just feel like over time, we've been able to just really kind of pick up a good head of steam around how to work together. And we continue to build our networks that help get the work done as well. So I really appreciate being able to work in this way through SalmonState. And I guess I don't know, just to maybe add you're asking for color and, like the Melanie Brown story.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've really kind of evolved into in the advocacy work that I, started on with Trout Unlimited Alaska, and it was all centered around Pebble. And then it kind of evolved into different things. I mentioned like sometimes we'd have to, fight these other tracks that were being hewn by our opposition. And, we'd have to focus on, like state-based legislation. Other times there would be land use issues that we needed to focus on because of how land was being redefined from subsistence priority over to mineral priority. And so we'd have to like really kind of hammer on that to keep key spots, including land around Pebble, from being just laid open for development, and completely neglecting the productive habitats of the land that feed the people. So we were having to look at things like the Bristol Bay Area Plan, and now we're kind of in that mode with Bureau of Land Management D1 lands, and how the Trump administration tried to redefine lands that were set aside for basically feeding the people, feeding Alaska's first people. We can kind of dive into that a little more, but basically where I'm trying to go with this is I try to find the yes in the work too, instead of always focusing on the no. And because I think it's just really important to have that orientation. You have to find the yes in life to keep yourself from being hardened. And I feel like there's, even though this work is really hard, when we're having to fight something, there's still plenty of room to find the things that we really want to promote and uplift, the good living aspects of being in this rich state.
Well, I commend you for that. I'm afraid I probably have gotten a little more hardened over the years and so it's always refreshing to have people who remind me that there's a lot of good left out there. You mentioned organizing. I'm going to come to that in a second, but I kind of want to dig a little bit deeper into the Melanie Brown story and ask, you're on the back deck of a boat, right? You're fishing. All of a sudden you're now organizing and advocating. What was there one moment where you kind of said, I need to do this. This is really, really important. This is more important or equally as important as fishing. Was there a moment like that?
Yeah, actually, in the very beginning, it was at first, I was taking a process technology class because I did, one of the things I didn't mention, before I started being an organizer and advocate for wild salmon, I was working on the North Slope in the Kuparik oil field as an inspector. So that was kind of my solace. It was kind of weird working in an oil field, but I was a single mother. I needed to support myself and my daughter. And I had an opportunity to go work up there and money up a little. And my parents were willing to take care of my daughter while I was away. And but I was taking a process technology class to try to further myself and create more opportunities for myself. But the inspection work was about detecting corrosion and preventing oil spills. So there was a bit of an environmental aspect to the inspection work that I did. But I was taking this process technology class, and a representative from the Alaska Miners Association came to visit, and he was talking about the Pebble prospect and how nothing like this has ever been found in the world. We've never found such a big lens of ore. He referred to it as a giant lens, and he made it sound like it was just solid gold, you know? And, when in fact, the ore body is, if you compile all the target minerals, it's less than 1%. That can be recovered. And I was just like, oh, wow, this sounds like a great opportunity for Bristol Bay to kind of diversify its economy. Me not knowing anything about the ill effects of mining and the risk that there would be to the environment, because I'd just never been faced with any mining work or knowledge like this. And I went home. I was still living with my parents because I couldn't afford to live apart from them. And I mentioned it to my dad, and I was like, gosh, this sounds, it was exciting the way this man talked about it. My dad said, oh no, this would be really bad. And I was like, what? Why? And he said, the tailings. And I was like, what are tail? I just didn't know anything. I didn't have any kind of working knowledge. And then, so my dad started explaining it to me because he used to sit on the Bristol Bay Native Corporation board. And this was something that they were facing dead on and just really trying to figure out how to fight the mine. And so that was where my education began. And then from there, I sought out more knowledge around it. And that's when I knew, like, I have to work on this. And once I finally was hired by Trout Unlimited Alaska, the first summer that I had as an organizer, every day leading up to when I put my gear in the water was spent at the LFS, the Lummi Fisheries Supply Store. In they were really nice about letting us use the vestibule in front of the store entry, so we could at least have a little bit of shelter. And every person that walked through the door, I was like, do you know about Pebble Mine? Hey, come talk to me. And I'd like talk to hundreds of people a day, and get them to sign stuff and make sure they knew what was going on. And just really got fishermen mobilized. And so that was where my fishing really kind of came in handy, because if people didn't already recognize me, they would most people recognized me through my parents, who had been fishing for so long, and I had been fishing too. So it just kind of like the two types of work, basically, they amplified each other. So that was an advantage that I had as a fisherman, to really kind of hit the ground running with my organizing work, which is about as grassroots as it could get, and help create groundswell and really get some movement. I mean, I'm not trying to take credit, for all that work, but it's just, that's the way that I approached it. And I know that I played my part in helping to get that groundswell going.
Well, for sure. And I think you reflect where a lot of us came to this. I mean, I didn't know anything about Pebble, and I was a fly fishing guide, but people said, hey, you have to understand the impact this has on the ability to fly fish in a a wonderful fishery. And, I think there's two sort of thoughts or questions that are going through my head. But before I get to them, let me just jump back for a second. You still have family fishing, right? You've got another generation fishing, right?
Yes. So this
That
past
must be rewarding.
it is. My daughter is actually, she's in school now. She's going to school and at the university in Fairbanks. And that's where I got my degree. But she's paying her own way with her fishing proceeds. And my son is still in high school, but this past summer, it was really wonderful. It was the first season that it was just me and my kids in the skiff because my son finally got old enough and big enough and strong enough to be able to be a full-fledged crewman. And so the three of us were able to handle the gear just ourselves. And prior to that, I would hire somebody because I needed a little extra muscle. I didn't want my kids to feel too much pressure,
Right.
and step
Sure.
up to something that was maybe a little too much for them. But this past year, we all managed just fine, and it just really felt good to fish with just family. Um, and then my brother-in-law fishes with my nieces, and they run two sites together. I'm just running one site now. I used to fish with my mom until she stopped fishing, and we would run two sites together out of one skiff. We fish out of an open skiff. My skiff is a 20-foot welded aluminum skiff, and
Wow.
it has pretty good carrying capacity for its length. And but we're lucky too, the tender is always close by, so we never have to go very far to get to the tender.
Gotcha. I mean, it's, I'm in awe. I'm so appreciative of that sort of small family business generational work. It's, which sort of leads me to my question in that you've been doing this for a while. Do you feel like, and maybe this relates to the work that you do with SalmonState, do you feel like elements of the public and hopefully elements of the Alaskan government, and maybe even our own elected officials here in the lower 48 are beginning to understand the contribution made by the native Alaskans to the economy of not just the state of Alaska, but the nation as well, because of the work in fishing, the fishing. I mean, and I mean that from the sense of understanding. This is something that's a heritage, that this is something that people, I don't think, understand the native aspect to this, if that makes sense. Do you feel like
Yeah.
that's changing at
Well,
all?
see, okay, I just want to be clear. You're referencing indigenous people who participate in the commercial fishery, is that right?
Well, yeah, but even the understanding of the public of the importance of the subsistence fishing in Alaska.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that should be understood and appreciated is that even though the people who participate in feeding themselves through subsistence or traditional and customary use, it offsets, the need to have income that would purchase the equivalent of the protein that is caught. That makes sense.
Sure.
So there is economic value there that it's really hard to measure because you can't just take a number and a value, and put that in a bank account or a ledger sheet, but it makes it possible for people to support themselves
Right.
in a way that does not require, like a formal job. And that's not to say that people don't have jobs, but it makes it possible to live in places that are remote and expensive to bring goods into. And it also prevents the burden of having to support people through, not charity, but just providing financial aid, or welfare.
Right.
So that's, there's an economic benefit there if you're looking at the big picture of things. But then going back to just the commercial fishing itself, we don't have income tax in Alaska, which I think is really dumb. But there are different fishing communities that have established landing taxes. So that there are assessments that are made that can help pay for local government and local services that way. So that contributes greatly to the economies of the state as well.
So let's take a step back and talk a little bit about SalmonState. You said it's sort of it grew out of your work with Trout Unlimited. Just sort of give us the overview of what SalmonState is and does, and how the issues that you guys are involved in.
Well, I guess just to be as concise as possible, SalmonState is focused on the preservation, conservation, and the future of wild salmon in the state of Alaska. So we used to be much more squarely focused on the terrestrial habitat of salmon, because that's one of the links of the chain that, like if that's disturbed, then it just breaks the whole cycle and salmon can't return to the places that are just destroyed or disturbed. But there's enough stuff happening in the ocean now that we're starting to focus more on what's happening in the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska around bycatch. Especially I talked about chum and kings earlier, not returning to the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, and people are really suffering. People who rely on salmon protein to feed themselves, or they're really missing salmon returning. And it's we're trying to do what we can to effect some change in the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council process, because that's what governs federal waters. And there are councils all around the country. And it's my hope that the different council or people who have influence over different councils around the country, we can find ways of building our networks so that we can kind of wrap arms together and hopefully make the changes that are necessary for not just people in the Yukon and the Kuskokwim to return to their traditional and customary practices, but also for other fisheries around the country that may be suffering. Sorry, I still need to kind of cover the overview, but I want to put a pin in national standards guidelines as they pertain to the Magnuson-Stevens Act.
Sure.
And so another thing we're working on, it's more terrestrial, it's more land-based. We're working on BLMD1 lands.
Tell me a little bit about, or for folks who may not know what BLMD1 lands are.
Yeah. So they're lands that they were carefully set aside to allow for great migrations of caribou. We have 3 really huge herds. And I guess for those of you who are tuned in from outside of Alaska, just imagine how the bison used to cover the lands in the lower 48. So it's like that up here still, but with caribou. There have been some bison introduced up here, some wood bison in certain areas. So it was right around the time that Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was made back in 71 that these lands were set aside to provide for these great migrations of caribou, but also to maintain salmon and fish habitat, and keep tracts of land open for people to access them for gathering and picking berries and all the foods that people feed themselves with in
Right.
rural Alaska. And in the 11th hour of the Trump administration, these lands were there were executive orders that would have turned 28 million acres of these lands over to mineral priority status from this withdrawn status that they were in, which would have opened them for claim staking and mineral entry and oil and gas exploration. And so the fear is that those types of activities, even if mines aren't developed, just the exploratory activity is
Sure.
enough to break herds and scatter them. And if migrations that have been tracked by hunters who feed their families with caribou, if they're not able to connect with the herd as they pass, it can, it's a huge burden to figure out where to find that protein somewhere else,
Sure.
or it also places the burden of having to travel farther by snow machine, and incur the cost of more gas, just to go and try to find food. So we're working on that, where there's a comment period that we're in the midst of right now with the draft environmental impact statement that was released in December, and the comment period will last until February 14th. And there's some hearings that are happening, and we're hoping that people are going to weigh in substantively and ask for the no action alternative A. There are 4 alternatives, and anybody can weigh in, even if you're not an Alaskan, even though
Sure.
these lands are specific to Alaska. So if you check out maybe what I'll do is I'll put a link in the chat if people want to look into it a little more.
And we'll put it in the show notes too.
Okay, great. So we're working on that, and then our Salmon Beyond Borders is a campaign that's housed within SalmonState, and that campaign is focused on transboundary rivers that flow from northern British Columbia into southeast Alaska, because right now, that there's what is called the Golden Triangle, and it's sort of like right now it's like the Wild West in northern BC right now, where it's basically just why BC has really lax regulations that make it desirable for multi-million-dollar corporations to set up their patent offices or whatever they're called, like in Vancouver. Right. Because they're able to bypass regulations that would normally be imposed on them if they set up shop elsewhere. And the concern is that, everything goes downstream and passes through Alaska, and these great salmon rivers, the Taku, the Stikine, and the Unic rivers. They're the arteries of southeast Alaska. And some of the projects are, they rival the size of the Pebble claim. And they're like, the mining entities are not even wanting to wait until the glaciers, they're all poised to start digging through glaciers.
Wow.
Which doesn't sound very safe to me, but also it's kind of like, wow, they can't even, we're already dealing with enough climate change that the glaciers are melting at a really rapid rate, but they're doing things to accelerate that process too.
That's crazy. Tell me, so you mentioned bycatch and national standards. You guys are working on that?
Yeah, we're doing what we can to coordinate with different entities around the state, like watershed councils on the Yukon and Kuskokwim, and tribal consortiums, and also just other fishing entities. Because there's always a strength in numbers, but one thing that SalmonState is really good at, we have a very effective communications team that's really ready to mobilize and drive traffic to comment portals.
Right.
So that there's more engagement, with people that way, and more awareness can be built, and which is what, how you create movement around something. So, yeah, so we're trying to create some movement and awareness around bycatch, and definitely people seemed ripe and ready to, it's like people are getting it right away. It doesn't take much prompting or briefing to click people's brains into what's happening. And we recognized some time ago that Magnuson-Stevens Act, as important as it is, the reauthorization, we don't know when the conditions are going to be right for it to be reauthorized with the amendments that need to be made in it.
Right.
Like we have champions like Jared Huffman,
right.
California, and then of course Mary Peltola, before she was even our congresswoman. She testified in a hearing that Jared Huffman called for, and then later on she assumed Don Young's seat. But it's not enough to, they're just on the House side, and on the Senate side, the conditions aren't favorable for a House bill to marry with a Senate bill, unfortunately. But there are other ways of amending the intention of Magnuson-Stevens Act through the National Standards Guidelines.
Right.
And Janet Coit was very receptive when she was approached about the amendments, or around amendments pertaining to National Standards 4, 8, and 9.
Right.
National Standard 4 has to do with allocations. 8 has to do with communities, and there's a lot of opportunity there, when it comes to trying to find solutions around getting fish back to the Yukon and Kuskokwim rivers, or Kings and Chums. And then National Standard 9 has to do with bycatch. So of course, that's an issue.
Well, and we understand that Congresswoman Peltola has taken bycatch up as sort of a signature issue for herself on this for the reauthorization of Magnuson, but alone if necessary. And for folks who don't know who Janet Coit is, she's the assistant administrator for fisheries at the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and is sort of the gatekeeper to doing this kind of work. Yeah, I wish there was more optimistic outlook for reauthorization of Magnuson, but that's it is what it is right now. Anything else in terms of what SalmonState's working on that sort of jumps out that you want to share with us? Because we're coming up on the hour, and I want to let you go, and but I do want to hear a song from you before we leave.
Sure.
And but I want to make sure we cover anything that you wanted to talk about in terms of the work that you're doing.
I think I covered the high points, around like the D1 lands, transboundary rivers under the Salmon Beyond Borders banner, trying to affect change around the national standards guidelines. And then, Pebble is always in the background. We're always, ready to do what needs to be done around that.
For sure.
Yeah. And then, so you can always visit our website, and you can see like what we're focused on, what petitions we have up, and pathways for, finding more information. Somebody just asked about fish farms.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that we're not actively working on that, but it's a concern that we have around carrying capacity. It's just, sometimes it's hard to find good pathways to really enter into something.
Right.
But carrying capacity is definitely an issue, like how, and that basically means like how, for any of you who may have not heard that term before, how much food is available to feed fish in the ocean, and do they end up fighting over that food? And a lot of times, like hatchery-born fish and wild-born salmon, do end up fighting over the same food supply.
Right.
And it's one of the things that people are pointing to. Another thing that contributes to that, of course, is climate change and ocean acidification and diminishment of food supply because of those reasons. And like smaller fish size is something that's been focused on. But this past season in Bristol Bay, actually, kind of, I saw the biggest fish, the biggest, most beautiful fish that I'd seen in years come through this summer. And it wasn't just true of the Naknek. Naknek is kind of known for its big slabs.
Uh-huh.
It's not unusual to get a 10-pound sockeye or even bigger. And I was hearing that even in the other river systems, the fish were coming back really, really big and healthy looking.
Well,
It helped that it was so cold. It was an unusually cold spring and summer. So that helped with the fish quality too. But then sadly, the market conditions dictated that we did not receive a fair price.
yeah.
But
So
yeah.
your work in the whole advocacy, food security has really had an important focus on indigenous native communities. And I just want to say that it's heartening for me and for I think many of us to see that those communities elevated in the conversation. And I think there's a lot to be done, a lot more to be done. But I applaud the work that you guys are doing to elevate that community in these discussions. And the network has through our work with Kevin Scribner, have been involved with the Wave Foundation in terms of getting food into communities, getting sustainable protein identified, and find the producers, the indigenous, the native producers, and it's good to know, Melanie, that you're out there doing that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing too. And it'll be good to see who your next guest is. I see some people here that would be good candidates in the talk.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So let's wrap up. Why don't you take us out on a high note with a song?
Okay, sure. I'm going to call Marcus forward. Hey, Marcus, you ready? Marcus is my music partner. We have he's my partner in life too, but we have a duo that we call Sunny Porch. And Marcus plays bass and I play guitar and sing. Marcus makes me sound good because I'm not a very fancy guitar player, but we'd like to share a song. It's basically what we call our advocacy song.
Okay.
It's kind of our sort of call to action. And if you're having trouble interpreting the words, think of it as a conversation between a human and a tree that or a tree that's part of a forest, which also represents the kind of advocacy that we have toward fish,
Right.
as fish people. So,
Awesome.
so this song is called "I Will Sing for You."
All right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I would sing for you, but the birds already do. I'd run my fingers o'er your leaves, but you already have the breeze. What need have you of me? Sing to me, please sing for me. Touch me, I feel for me. Oh, sing for me. The sun, it whispers and you grow, and it's the only language you need to know. And still I tell you of my day, not knowing if you hear a word I say. Not all people can hear our voices that the winds bring and make us dance and sing. People like you need to sing for us. People like you need to help other people see. I will sing for you. Thank you, Marcus.
Melanie, that was terrific. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Well, thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it. Adding in the artistry at the beginning and the end is a terrific opportunity. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. And for our guests today, that's it for tonight. For now, we've got the next Waterside Chat in the works. We do have a communications program coming up in February with Colin Delaney. It's called Deeper Dive, and you'll see information about that in separate emails. But for now, we'll say thank you to Melanie, and thank you all for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode of Waterside Chat, share it with your friends and colleagues. You can check us out on YouTube or most podcast services. To stay up to date on Waterside Chats and the Marine Fish Conservation Network, sign up for emails at conservefish.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next Waterside Chat.